All right, we're recording.
Yeah.
We're recording.
And normally, good morning. I think we can call the meeting to order. And the meeting of the Parks and Shade Tree Commission will please come to order, and we'll start with the roll call.
Carolyn Diefendorfer, present.
Marty Marino, present.
Catherine Downs, present.
And Laura Ritter, present. Oh, my goodness. I may have gotten here without my glasses. Oh, here we go. Okay. Shall we move on to approve the minutes? Did everyone get a chance to read them?
I did.
Actually, I did not, so I am going to let you, I'm going to recuse myself on that, and,
Okay, I move that we approve the minutes of the March 27th, 2023, April 24th, 2023, and June 26th, 2023 meetings.
I second the motion.
what is it? There's a, we can discuss it if you want.
You weren't here for one of
Oh,
them.
you
right?
weren't
wasn't
here.
here for one of them, but I agree what am I supposed to say again?
Okay, let's approve the ones you were here for, so
So I think that would be, I'll amend the motion. I move that we approve the minutes of the meetings from March 27th, 2023, and April 24th, 2023.
Okay.
Second the motion.
You need
Second the amendment.
Second the
First, we
motion.
have to vote on the amendment. We all agree to amend the motion?
You can do a friendly amendment if the seconder wants to
Okay.
second it.
Okay, so then we can vote on to approve the minutes of March 27th and April 24th.
I agree.
All in
Aye.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Then we'll move right on to, there being no old business, we'll move on to new bit.
We don't have a quorum here to do those.
We can do those on the next one.
So you're deferring those, right?
Yes. Okay. We're now going to conduct an administrative appeal hearing on case number one is on behalf of James and Mary O'Connell, owners of the property located at 17 Park Avenue, and pertains to the removal of one 15-inch diameter loblolly pine, and it's a city tree. Would Liz like to give her report?
Sure. The following is the report of the city arborist regarding the above referenced request that is to be heard before the commission on Monday, July 24th, 2023. This application was submitted on June 2nd, 2023, and shall be heard under the former City of Rehoboth Beach Comprehensive Tree Ordinance, Chapter 253, adopted in 1988 and 2006. The applicant submitted a request to remove one loblolly pine street tree adjacent to 17 Park Avenue. A planting plan was not submitted to replace the loblolly pine. The existing pine is 16 inches in diameter. The tree shows signs of decay evidenced by shelf conchs and a longitudinal wound on the trunk. While those are visual indicators of decay, the severity can't be determined without identifying the conch and testing the tree's density with a specialized tool. The tree is adjacent to overhead utilities, and the utility pruning was likely the point of entry for the observed decay. There are several trees on the city right-of-way, including 3 dogwoods, an oak, 2 junipers, 2 Japanese maples, and a pear. The trees are 3 to 15 inches caliber and in fair to good condition. The private property also has several large trees on site, including 5 evergreens and 1 oak, ranging from 20 to 30 inches in diameter. As per City Code, Parks and Shade Tree Commission has the authority to permit the removal of trees on city property. 253.12 Maintenance C. No person shall plant, spray, preserve, prune, remove, cut above ground, or otherwise disturb any tree on any street or municipal-owned property without first receiving permission from the Parks and Shade Tree Commission. Any tree removed from municipal-owned property must be replaced unless otherwise authorized by the Parks and Shade Tree Commission.
Does anyone have questions for Liz?
No, I'd like somebody to, if we could pull up the pictures. When I went over to the property, I was having trouble determining which tree we were talking about,
Yep.
because there's a whole lot of trees.
Yep.
Yeah, but I think we need, I think we're gonna have to pull them up.
Could we pull them up on the TV if possible? Ann, is that possible?
I don't have anything to put on the screens. Do you, Liz?
I guess
They are embedded in the agenda,
I guess the one
yes.
question I have is the tree that's sort of leaning away, but it's leaning towards the street, not towards the house?
Okay.
Yeah, can we pull up the stuff that was embedded?
I can't do it from here.
Okay, Liz, are you able to pull up the stuff that's embedded?
I mean, I'm not even logged into the computer.
I can give you all this picture, it's obvious which one is wood rot, anchor on it.
It is,
Here, I got it. It's a small
okay.
picture if you want to turn on the overhead.
Okay, and as I said before, I believe it's leaning away from the house.
This one, so you can see the lines are here, the house is back in this direction, street is going this way. And you can even see the conch right there.
Okay,
You can see any canker is like
It's that wood rot right there.
right there, yep.
so I guess I have a question for Liz. Is this a tree that the city would eventually take down as opposed to, if it's in that bad a condition and it's a street tree, would the city take it down?
I can't predict the future, if that's what you're asking. I mean, it's obvious what happened to the tree. It got scalped on the backside, and then decay, fungi injured the tree and slowly started
Right,
creating issues
right.
over years, likely. It's just, unfortunately, those type of trees should not really be planted under or near lines, because that's what happens. That being said, we wouldn't take down a tree just because it was under lines.
Right,
We wouldn't plant them, but
right.
Does the applicant have any, does anyone else have questions for Liz? Would the applicant like to say anything?
you want to talk?
Okay, it's a Virginia pine. She talked about the canker. Actually, the back of that tree is rotten up. Okay, where do I point at?
Down, the paper.
On the page. Okay. These here. Okay, right there is wood rot running that, right up that side, right? Get my big finger out of the way. But anyway, that's all canker up here, which is canker's wood rot. And eventually that tree's gonna fail. She's not gonna take it down until it does fail. The city won't. So, but it will fail. But the power company, utility is the one that did the damage to the tree. They cut it so hard, and now she's got wood rot. Virginia pine's a soft wood. So the problem with soft wood is when you prune it too hard, it rots. And that's what we have right now. So the plus about it is when it falls, it's not gonna fall and hit her house, but it will fall in the street.
Right.
So that's it. Any questions for me?
I have no questions.
I don't have any questions.
I don't think I have.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, does the public have any comment? Hearing none, I'll close public comment, and do any of the commission members wish to make a comment?
I mean, the tree, when I went over and saw it, the tree is not in good condition. And I think it's just a matter of time before it comes down. So,
I'm not sure what the question is. Is the question whether or not to take the tree down or who's responsible for taking the
no,
tree down?
it's, can the tree be taken down by the property owners?
Correct. And another piece to think about is, sorry to cut you off, go ahead. I didn't-
Well, I was gonna say which. Is it the property owner's responsibility to take it down? Or is it the city's responsibility, or is it the utility company's responsibility?
That's not part of the issue today. The issue today is the private adjacent property owner is doing major renovation, has done tree removal, and they would like to do some re-landscaping and clean everything up. So they are requesting to remove the tree and pay for it.
Okay.
And one more element to add to that is to think about whether you want to require the tree to be replaced or not. You can authorize a relief such that a replacement tree wouldn't be required, but just make that clear if possible.
I think the question really is, should we impose a fee in lieu? Should we impose a tree plus a fee in lieu? Because there's a question of 15 inches of diameter, or would just a replacement tree suffice?
Well, I guess I have one question. It would seem to me there really isn't room to replace a tree there.
I mean, I try to make the point in my report that it's pretty well-treed
Yeah,
lot
exactly.
and city right away. And I mean, you never know what the future holds. They may come back and ask to remove more trees. We don't know that.
Right.
It could maybe have another understory tree, but I don't think it would be appropriate to replace a canopy tree in that same location. And the private property itself is well treed as well.
Right, right.
Yeah, like I said, 5 or 6 big, 20, 30 inchers.
Right. I mean, with the utility lines there, I just think if we were to require them to plant a tree there, over time, it would be in the utility lines, and you're going to have the tree butchered by the utility company.
Yes.
So, I don't feel that there's appropriate space there. If we were to say they need to replace the tree, I don't believe they can properly replace it there. I don't know if there's another spot that Liz would have available for them to plant a tree.
I try not to do that one tree at a time because it becomes such a
Right.
burden on the city
Right.
to have to pull people away or have a contractor try and go to one tree. It doesn't really make sense. We like to do them 20, 30, 40 at a time.
Right.
Wouldn't that be the point at which we just impose a fee in lieu that would allow for the planting of a tree?
I think, maybe that'll go to Alex. I don't believe a fee in lieu can be done for a park.
That's what I
street
was
tree.
wondering.
It hasn't been requested, correct?
Yeah.
And it would require a recommendation from the arborist, so I'm
I
not
don't-
sure that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's. To me, the fee in lieu is more related to private
private
property.
Right.
You have the Park and Shade Tree Commission has the ability to, yes, you can remove your tree. No, you can't remove your tree. And then whether or not it has to be replanted. It doesn't say anything about a fee in lieu for private property.
For public property.
Yeah, sorry,
For
for
public
public.
property. Right.
Oh, yeah, we made that person plant a tree.
I would tend to agree. I mean, it's very well wooded in front of that house, along that house. I don't feel that there's a good spot for them to put the tree down. And I think taking that tree out probably opens it up a little bit to help the remaining trees thrive more. Katie, I don't know if you went over and looked at it.
I did. And the the lot is definitely heavily treed, and hopefully it will remain that way. I mean, we don't have a way of,
But we can't see we can't see the future,
future,
and
but
putting more trees on to an already well-treed lot. And I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, with it being a street tree, it really should be replaced as a street tree if we were to require that.
Yeah, ideally in the same, for a situation like
Right,
this, in the same
and I don't
location.
believe there's sufficient room there for them to
Okay.
put an additional street tree in.
Just could Katie finish what she was going to say? And then you,
oh, I did not think that there was necessarily space for another tree. I mean, we could probably get a small tree in there. But is it really going to thrive? Probably not. At least until other trees come down. So I mean, it's not a pretty tree. It's not really providing much because it's like, exactly, a pole with like a little bit of growth off of one side. So, I mean, it seems reasonable to just allow them to take it down and not have to replace it unless we can do a fee in lieu or require requiring another tree on that property just doesn't seem reasonable.
Well, I believe it would have to be a street tree, though.
It would have to be a
Right,
street
and I don't believe there's sufficient room to plant a tree in the city right away over there that will.
Not on
that
their
will-
property.
No, that will thrive, exactly.
okay, it sounds like we're pretty much in agreement that there's not really a good space for this tree. And there are a reasonable canopy along that property line. So could I have a motion?
I move that we allow removal of the 15-inch diameter loblolly pine city street tree.
I second the
Motion?
motion.
Okay, would we like to vote? Let's start at this end this time.
I vote,
A vote of yes is to remove the tree, and a vote of no is to not remove the tree.
I vote,
Wait,
Oh, Madam Chair, sorry to interrupt. Just typically, whoever makes the motion starts with their reasoning first.
oh, okay.
So I vote yes for the reasons that I previously stated. The tree is not in good health. It is leaning, and there's not sufficient room to plant an additional street tree and have it thrive.
I vote yes to remove the tree for the same reasons, basically. The area has an awful lot of trees, and I think it might even benefit from not having this tree.
Katie?
and I vote yes to allow them to remove the tree because of the reasons stated and the fact that there's not room for replacement, and it's not necessarily a beneficial tree on the property.
And the chair agrees for the reasons already stated, and so the motion passes unanimously. You may remove the tree.
We're gonna correct prune all the trees on the property also. All those trees, we're gonna correct prune the rest of the trees.
I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
You have to go to the,
We're also gonna correct prune all the trees on the property.
oh, well, that will be helpful. Okay. Are we moving on? Do I close this meeting and then?
No, it's the same meeting, so you would just move to other business.
Okay, I move to other business, which is the training session on the newly adopted Comprehensive Tree Ordinance.
Thank you.
Bye, Jeff.
Who's training us?
Me. I'm waiting for Ann. She's writing stuff down. Can you turn on the monitors for my PowerPoint? There we go. Thank you, Ann. All right, so I will start off and I'll have a little agenda for us, but if you guys have questions throughout, feel free to interrupt me and just ask them while we're on topic instead of us trying to go scroll backwards. And then keep in mind, this is not necessarily just about the new code. This is about how it relates to the commission, okay? So there will be changes that don't really affect you that I either won't go over or will kind of go over very quickly. All right. So here's our quick agenda. We'll go over the current duties of the commission, some code changes as they relate to the commission, an actual duty change, and then we'll do a quick scenario at the end that I had the worksheets for. So hopefully everybody has a pen. If not, I can go get one. Okay, so this made its way around when we were doing the meetings with the commissioners, the comparison chart, so it shouldn't be anything new. Some of it relates to you all, some of it doesn't, but just wanted to make you aware of it. So under the previous code, you heard appeals of my decision, you determined fee in lieu, you heard requests to remove city trees, and then anytime the city commissioners requested input, that also came to you. So with the new code, you're still hearing appeals, you're still having any input requested by the commissioners, and then we have a new thing, which is the ability to approve a waiver in special conditions. And if you notice, the city tree removal aspect, like the case we just heard, went away from your purview. And then also the fee in lieu is now administrative. So you will no longer hear as many of those. So it is $1,200 for a 2-inch tree. They can write a check to the City of Rehoboth without paying to come to this commission. So we did add a couple of new tree removal reasons. The commissioners were really big on wanting flexibility for property owners. So these are a couple of ways we gave that to them. So a few nuisance and invasive species were allowed to be removed via permit, but just by virtue of it being a pear tree, it can be removed. And then also smaller trees are allowed to be removed and replaced even if there's nothing wrong with them. So basically replaced in kind. Tree density had a decent change to it. So it used to be only residential or residentially used properties had a tree density requirement. And on a single family property, it was 3 trees per 5,000 square feet. And if there were multiple dwelling units on site, so like apartments or garage apartments, then it became 2 trees per dwelling unit without regard to the size of the lot. The current code is now applicable to every property in the City of Rehoboth Beach, and it's just 3 trees per 5,000 square feet. So it doesn't matter if it's commercial, if there's 10 apartments, 1 house, it's 3 trees per 5,000.
Liz. Sorry, to go back 1 or 2 slides.
I'll allow. No, just kidding.
I know,
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Which one?
You're going fast.
Okay. I assumed everybody read and reviewed, so I can slow down. Go ahead.
The code change new tree removal reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So they're allowed to state the reason being a tree is an Ailanthus, a Bradford pear, Japanese black pine, Leyland cypress, or Norway maple.
Yes.
And that's allowed, they're allowed to do that? Okay,
Yep. So it
And-
doesn't have to be dead or dying. You can just say tree is an invasive Bradford pear.
okay.
Does that still come before us, or is that just,
No,
that's
it's
just a
just-
permit? That's part of the permit process?
New reason in the list of you can remove a tree if it's dead or dying in the footprint of a new house. It's just, these are two new reasons kind of tacked on to the bottom of the existing list we had.
So, and a tree's under 8 inches, so
Mm-hmm.
that's changed from 6.
Well, yes and no. So if it's, say, you have 3 trees on your property, you just built a new house a couple of years ago and you had no trees, and now you have 3 brand new ones and they're 5 inches, right? They're required because you have to have your 3 trees. But under this, say you just bought the house and you hate those 3 trees and you want 3 different trees. They put in red bud and, you know, back at your last house, you hated your red bud or whatever it is. You can pull those 3-4 inch trees out because they're under 8, and then you have to put them back
With
So.
something that is.
on the list.
On the list.
Yeah, so it's kind of just like a 1-for-1, because what happens is people change their minds, or they inherit things, or they plant things and they realize they don't like them. And so when we were revising the code, we thought, what would be a reasonable size that could easily be replaced? So if you're pulling out a 7-inch tree and you're putting back a 2 to 3 inch tree, it's almost a break even, right? How strict do you want to be with a 6-inch tree? So we didn't feel like it was anything lost by trading a few-year-old tree for a new tree. And then it made people happier. So it gave them more flexibility to plant new trees instead of maybe detracting, that you plant a new tree and you're locked in forever. Like you can never remove it unless it's going to die. So maybe you choose a tree and you decide you hate it. You can replace it now
Okay,
before it gets big, right?
okay, and, I'm sorry. Yeah, I know.
No,
you
you're fine.
said
Don't
to
be,
just-
no, this is supposed to be for training, so ask away.
So the major changes, the comparison chart, so comparison to the current and draft code
So
main points, that is, so,
the draft is the new code. So this chart was made when we were still, had the other code was still existing and we were trying to pass the new one, hence draft.
okay, so, draft code is the new code.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so so I see, I was, okay,
Yeah, so let me flip back. This is what we're going to go over for the code changes that relate to the commission. So those couple of new reasons, the change in minimum density, a change in how mitigation is done, and then a addition to the code, which is arborist reports.
okay, and then $1,200 that, $1,200 administrative fee per tree. No appeal is required. What
Yep.
exactly does that, what does that mean?
So currently, they pay to come to the commission and sit here and request a fee in lieu of mitigation, which is usually about a 2-month process. So now, and it can only be granted upon my recommendation, or the city arborist, whoever that may be at the time. So now it is set, so you guys set your own fee for fee in lieu of mitigation, your own charge per inch, I believe, which was $400.
400.
And you can change that, which we've done before if it was a unique circumstance. So now, if they come to me and say, okay, well, we have to plant 10 trees, but we only have room for 4, the city arborist can allow that administrative fee of $1,200 for the remaining 6 trees. If they want to pay less, they would still have to come to you, right? So you might hear some appeals that somebody doesn't want to pay $1,200 for a tree. For a 2-inch tree, yes, so $600 an inch. So you may hear some of those, but it would have to be worth their while because it's, costs money and time to come here as well. And so while a fee in lieu of mitigation is quote unquote pending, waiting to come here, they don't get a permit. So if it's a new house or it's a tree removal permit or whatever, it sits until they come here and they get a fee in lieu of mitigation, like with the old code. So that kind of waiting period is done away with unless they decide to come back and request us basically a waiver of that fee.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. All right. So tree removal reasons, the 2 new ones, which I don't anticipate you'll hear any appeals about these, but I just want you guys to be aware. Tree density. So I don't really believe you'll hear too many appeals about this either, but it is a pretty decent change from what we did because it pulls in all the commercial properties. And so everybody essentially has to plant or pay their fair share. All right, so mitigation, and you guys deal with mitigation quite a bit. I'd say that's the majority of our cases we hear. So the way it's calculated under the previous code was certain trees require mitigation depending on the species and size. So like a dogwood required and a holly and a cedar require mitigation starting at 4 inches. And then everything else was 24. And then that was done by inches, and then minimum density was done by number of trees. So you have 2 different concepts and the overlap, which always made it a little confusing in my mind, like an apples to oranges scenario, right? They're both trees, they're both fruit, but one's being counted in a different way. So we've changed, and then also there was the issue, and in my experience, it's rare, where they really wanted it to be the quality of the tree and not the quantity. So less of a focus on planting a hedgerow of hornbeams, and then rather we would rather have one oak planted with a canopy than a hedge of hornbeams, right? And there's a place for both of them. Hedges of hornbeams are beautiful if that's what you want. But to force somebody into that when an oak would have more value is something the commissioners wanted to address. So the way the mitigation works now is if you take a tree out, you have to put one back in. It's that simple. There is caveat if you already have a, quote, treed lot, and for the code, they are defining treed lot as 90 inches of existing caliber, so think of it as 3 30-inch trees, right? That's a lot of tree for 5,000 square feet. So if you already have 90 inches of trees on the lot, you are exempt from that replanting. And that was done to essentially not punish the people who have wooded lots. So similar to the case we just heard, to take out a tree from the woods and then require them to shove it back in doesn't really make any sense. So that's where that exemption came from. I think you will still get appeals of this because I think people will not want to replant trees, and I think this is going to be a majority of the cases you'll hear. I could be wrong, but this is just my thought coming in, is that people will not want to replant, and once again, we can do that administrative fee in lieu, right? I can do that, but if I don't agree with it and they have room to plant these trees, I will not approve that. The city arborist will not approve if there is room to plant a decent tree on the property. That fee in lieu will not be administratively approved, and it could end up coming back here. So the tie-in of those 2 concepts is what you need to be aware of.
Well, so then, do you approve do you say, before coming to us, do you say, well, you can you can just pay $1,200 per tree. Instead of replacing them. And then it potentially wouldn't come to us?
Potentially.
Or does it come to us and we make a decision about it, and then you say, well, instead of doing that, you can do the $1,200 a tree?
So the city arborist is supposed to take into account their natural area plan when reviewing their replanting. So say they're supposed to replant 2 trees and there's plenty of room for 2 trees on the property. And they just say, we don't like trees, we don't want to replant any, we just want to pay and move on.
Right.
Well, the city arborist should not just allow them to do that administrative, write a check and move on if the natural area plan allows for trees to be there. So that's the case in which they might come here and say, we realize we have room for trees, we hate trees, it fell on our house when we lived in Florida in a hurricane, and we don't want to replant any. And then you'll have to make that decision.
Right.
And maybe they can request less than $1,200 and you can make that decision as well, or they can just pay the $1,200 if you approve it.
They always have to have the minimum, though. I mean,
Yes.
if they have 90 inches across, if they have 2 45-inch trees, they're still going to have to plant. If they take one down, but they have 2 45-inch trees remaining, they're still going to have to plant one because they have to have the minimum.
Yes. But that doesn't stop people from not wanting to have the minimum. You've heard cases.
They have a pool or something and they say, we don't want.
You've heard cases before where people did not want to plant the minimum trees.
Right.
So we'll continue to hear them, in my thought.
Thank you.
Yep.
Wait, is there no alternative to the minimum? Like, we have had cases where, I don't know, there was stuff on the lot, or if you say that there's room for a 3rd tree.
Well, they have ability to request a waiver, which we'll get to at the end.
Oh, okay.
All right. So this is another big change, and I don't think so much that you'll be hearing appeals as related to this, but it'll be a new piece of information for you guys that you may see during your meetings. So one of the commissioners, the things they wanted to focus on was tree preservation during construction. That was one of our bullet points. And so as part of that, we identified what we consider a heritage tree. So a tree that's measuring 20 inches in diameter, measured at 4.5 feet, which is, for me, close to my chin, but typically it's thought of as at shoulder height. And when we are doing a new construction or a big renovation, if you have a heritage tree nearby, okay? So that doesn't mean it has to be on the property. It could be the neighbor's tree or it could be a city tree. So if it's within a certain distance, which I believe is 10 feet in the code, then it triggers the requirement for arborist reports. So the arborist report is done by a for-hire private arborist hired by the property owner or contractor. And they have to be a certified arborist. It can't be just a random landscaper or tree cutter. So, and the point of, so there's 3 different types of reports. There's one done pre-demolition. There's one done pre-construction. So after the demo, when we have the house plans before they start to build the house. And then there's one done at the end of construction. So the point of the reports, we want them to provide information. So, and it's just for the heritage trees, not all the trees on the site. That was believed to be too onerous. So the larger trees will get a report regarding information on the site conditions, specific to the heritage tree, its condition, because just because it's a heritage large tree doesn't mean it's in good shape, right? So if that pine we saw today with the decay in the conchs was 20 inches, that would show up in this report. This is what we've observed. And then also species tolerance. So certain species are known to be better in different scenarios than others. For example, a dogwood hates any fill dirt, root changes, etc. Some trees you can pile 8 inches of dirt on top of them and they're perfectly fine. So certain species tolerance that you see over the years should make it known in these reports.
What about things like if you are, there's a heritage dogwood that is in a full blazing sun situation. And what would you do about something like that? Because, I mean, those of us that know the conditions that they like.
Well, that would probably be in the report. And I gave you guys example reports that I drew up. And remember, this is untested. I expect them to change a little bit. And for each arborist that does one, to modify the report that fits them. Like at my previous company, we had our own template, right? But I would expect them to say, like, this American dogwood shows signs of borers and anthracnose and leaf curl, and that's likely because it's sitting in full sun and they like partial to full shade, right? Okay. So that's something you could say, like, this species likes this. Maybe it's not a good candidate for preservation because it's going to now be in full sun and we're ripping out all its roots or whatever it may be. So we want them here to make recommendations. So is the tree, the heritage tree, a good candidate for preservation? Because if we're going to be, say it's a not tolerant tree that's in less than ideal conditions, and now we're going to be performing construction all around it, pruning half of its canopy, maybe it's not a good candidate. And that's the type of thing that the private arborist should be giving their recommendations on.
Okay.
And that report will go to everybody. So it should go to the person that's hired and paid them, the contractor, the city. And it's good because that way we have 2 people looking at this. So you have the city arborist, who should be an expert in municipal trees and tree preservation. And then you have the private arborist, who should be an expert, right? So you have 2 different people, 2 different viewpoints. Sometimes they'll agree, sometimes they won't. But the more information you have is always better.
Right.
Even if the information maybe isn't 100%. So anybody who's ever got a recommendation, say you have a tree at your house and you call 3 contractors because you don't know what to do. You take the 3 recommendations and you look at them and you analyze, right? You take all the information and maybe one arborist says one thing and the other 2 say something else, and you have to compare that because they're all 3 qualified in their same field, same industry, but that doesn't mean they'll always agree. And the good thing about these reports, because the issue we had was the city arborist can say, no, you can't remove that tree during construction, right? It's a good tree, it's big, it's outside the footprint, you need to keep it. Well, then they don't water it for 9 months and rip out all its roots and have no topsoil and no mulch and then prune off half the canopy, right? So at the end of the day, was that really accomplishing a lot? And there are benefits to those trees too, right? They still have all the carbon stored in the trunk and all that good stuff. But as part of these reports, we can actually require these remediation efforts. So say a report comes back and the arborist says construction's going to be in July and August and we need to deep root water the trees. The city can say, okay, we need a signed proposal from the owner or the contractor saying they are going to pay you to deep root water these trees, if we agree with it, right? So the more information, the better. We can require some remediation efforts to help preserve these trees because, once again, what was the point in requiring them to stay if we couldn't require the actions to keep them alive, right? Because it does no good after 1.5 years, 2, 3 years that the tree dies. That just makes everybody frustrated, including the homeowner. Because at the end of the day, the homeowner isn't always, you can't consider them a tree expert, right? I mean, in my last job, I'd have times I'd go out and the project construction site was underway and the homeowner's like, we just came down and we saw this giant pile of roots laying next to our favorite tree and we figured that was bad, so we called you. And no, this is what happens. And you know, the homeowner isn't here. They don't 100% know, but something triggers them and doesn't seem right. And we're trying to prevent that, right? Because at the end of the day, once the damage is done, remediation is very difficult and very costly. Up front, it might cost $500, $1,000. If you're trying to fix that damage on the back end, it might cost $3, $4, $5, and with limited results, really. So, in almost all circumstances, the preventative measures will be cheaper than removing and replanting the tree as well.
Right.
Liz, would like the measures you said, remember the dogwood, as a result of these reports, can you say the footprint has to be done in a specific way as opposed to just coming up to within an inch of the tree? Is that part of this process?
Yeah,
So you
so-
have a little more control over the way the work is going to be done?
Yes.
I
In
think that-
theory, this is what we're trying to do.
I
You know,
think-
in a year, I think we'll come back and see how well some of these things have worked. The arborist report is not a new concept. It's very common, especially on the West Coast where tree regulations are strong. So this is us trying something new, and it should work. We're hoping it'll work, but we'll have to kind of stay tuned. And like, for example, something on construction sites that is a very common practice is using an air excavator to like create your building line, or even I've used before walk behind trenchers. So you trench out your line, cut the roots cleanly versus using, say, a big piece of equipment that rips and tears. So you're making a cut here and then you use a backhoe and it rips the root back another 5 feet. So using those two different devices would be something those two pieces of equipment is something the city could require because they do help retain trees. And that's what we're hoping to do, have two people looking at this and coming up with a plan to preserve the trees and presenting that plan to the contractor or tree owner saying, this is your best chance to keep these trees alive, and providing not just the city with information, but the tree owner, right? So they can make the best decision in the maintenance and preservation of the tree.
Well, will these sound like good changes. Will they be enforced?
I think the plan will come directly to me, so I'll be able to review that, the city arborist. I will require, we have the ability to do so, say if I say, you know what, I agree with you, Mr. Arborist, it definitely should have these 2-3 treatments. Go back to your contractor, homeowner, give me a signed proposal, right? And we're also requiring this for tree replanting requirements in hopes that it is almost self-reporting in a way, because anybody who's ever been on a service industry where you're writing a report, doing a contract, here, sign, take your deposit. If somebody then cancels on you, they want to be off the hook. So say whatever company it is said, yep, here's the contract, the owner signed, we're going to do these 3 treatments, and then the owner comes back and said, never mind, I want my money back, I cancel. 9 times out of 10, that tree company is going to come to me and say, hey, I know we said we were doing this, but I don't want to be on the hook because they just canceled with us, right? So it's almost self-reporting in a way because the contractor doesn't want to be on the line.
Right.
So that is the hope for both that and the replanting, is that it'll be self-reporting in a way, because at the end of the day, there's no way for me to physically go and tell if they injected the soil with the root treatment. You're going to have a grid of holes visible for a few days. So it'll be hard to do that. So we're hoping that it's almost self-reporting in a way, and that also counting on homeowners and contractors wanting to do the right thing and just not knowing what the right thing is, because it's not as much a financial issue here, right? And preservation is almost always cheaper. So if it's presented in that way, we hope people between the contractors, both contractors and the owner, use the information to do the right thing, which maybe is a lofty goal, but so
I'm just kind of worried that the contractors will find short list of arborists who are going to be much less particular than you are.
Well, I
So-
don't have to approve the report. I can request an amended report. So it does you no good to give me a report that says everything is fine, life is good. If we
Okay.
just, fluff up the leaves, it'll be good. Because the city arborist should not sign off on that if that is not the truth. Okay. And maybe it is. Maybe the tree is way out of the footprint and just needs maybe regular tree protection fencing and for nobody to go over there and mess with it, and it'll be fine. But most of the time with the size of our
Okay,
lots, that won't be
but
true.
you have the authority to reject a report that you don't think is sufficient.
Request amendments, I think is how I'd put it, yeah. Yeah, basically saying I don't think this is a reasonable assessment because of X, Y, Z. And there probably will be a learning curve there, both for the private arborist and me as we collaborate on those. But I'm thinking of it more as a collaboration than the city approving, rejecting, et cetera. Okay. All right, so in terms of how it will come to the commission, like I said, it'll be more information, so you may see that as part of documentation for appeals. I hope that it will limit some of these appeals related to construction, because I can think of a few recent ones where the homeowner looked really confused and didn't know what was happening. Had they had that interaction and report up front, they probably wouldn't have ended up here, okay? So, if it limits 20% of those appeals, I think that's a good thing. And then on the 80% that go through, we have more information. And we also have that thing, like if the tree doesn't make it or starts to decline and we just know that really everything was done that could have been done and it just wasn't meant to be, essentially. Like sometimes things happen that you don't expect. Any more questions on the reports before we move on? Okay. All right, so now we have both a code change and a duty change. So the commission is able to do waivers or variance as per 253-8A. So it provides a couple of instructions in there, right? So you can do a variance when there's special conditions, right? Exceptional situation, where they are facing an unnecessary hardship or a really exceptional difficulty. But it can't go against the code, right? So you can't just feel bad for somebody and say, well, it goes against the whole code, but that's okay, because we feel bad for you. And we all know how hard it is when people stand up here, one person in front of you, and ask for something for themselves, and you have to weigh that against what the code says and what's right for the city as a whole. It's not an easy task. And I deal with it all the time when people are appealing right to your face in person and you want to help them, but at the same time, you have thousands of other people that you're responsible for balancing that need. So if you can help that person and not go against the code and not harm anything else, that's something we should consider.
Can you weigh in a little bit?
Yeah,
on
go.
this?
You know
So-
way
so-
more about waivers and variances than
Well,
me.
so this language was borrowed intentionally from the zoning code. The Board of Adjustment grants variances for certain things in the zoning context. And this was intended to be similar to that process. You're not taking any authority away from the Board of Adjustment because you're not in the zoning chapter, we're in a tree code. So, but it's meant to have a lot of similarities to what the Board of Adjustment does, which is grant variances. For example, somebody comes in and says, I've got a 10-yard or 10-foot setback. I would like that setback reduced to 9 feet so I can build a little bit further. That's the sort of thing that the Board of Adjustment hears. In this instance, you'll hear things like, I think about cases from the previous code where somebody would request a tree removal permit, it would be denied, or it would be granted, but they had to replace so much additional caliper and there's just no place on the lot to do it. That's been sort of taken care of in the new code, but in that instance, I always thought while I sat there that it would be appropriate perhaps to grant some form of a variance or waiver because the lot is so entirely treed that it's exceptionally difficult for them to plant the trees that the code requires. So that's the kind of instance where you'd be looking for, okay, if I do a direct application of the new code, does it work some sort of exceptional practical difficulty? That's the legal term that's used. Some sort of exceptional practical difficulty that is real, not just theoretical, but something that's real. And when you balance the difficulty to this owner who's requesting a variance against the harm that it's going to do to the neighbors, if you grant that variance, then, and you say it works more harm on the owner, then that's the instance where you should say, perhaps it's appropriate here to grant the variance or the waiver. The Supreme Court, the Delaware Supreme Court, in the context of variances for boards of adjustment, have developed what are called the quick check factors, but just boiled down in one Supreme Court opinion, they said, such practical difficulty is present where the requested dimensional change is minimal, or here, where the removal of the tree is minimal. The dimensional change is minimal, and the harm to the applicant, if the variance is denied, will be greater than the probable effect on neighboring properties if the variance is granted. So that's that balancing technique I was just mentioning. Therefore, to determine if the difficulties presented by the owner are practical rather than theoretical and exceptional rather than routine, Board of Adjustment of Newcastle, this was this case, it says the board should take into consideration the nature of the zone in which the property lies. So in zoning, you're dealing with what zoning district are you in. Here, you don't have to worry about that because, as Liz just said, this code applies to every property in the city in the same way. So it doesn't matter what zoning district you're in. The character, so these are the things you should be considering. The character of the immediate vicinity and the uses contained therein. So is it a very treed area of the city? Is there not many trees? Is there one particular type of trees? In the pines, is it more important that you protect pines versus some other species? It says whether, if the restriction upon the applicant's property were removed, such removal, and this is not tree removal, this is the restriction being you can't remove this tree or you can remove this tree. Whether, if the restriction upon the applicant's property were removed, such removal would seriously affect such neighboring property and uses. Whether, if the restriction is not removed, the restriction would create unnecessary hardship or exceptional practical difficulty for the owner in relation to his efforts to make normal improvements in the character of that use of the property which is permitted under the use provisions in the ordinance. So that it's really kind of a balancing test. Is there a real exceptional practical difficulty here? Not something that's theoretical, not just I feel bad for this person. You know, these variances, there's other case law in the context of zoning boards that say variances should not be the expectation. It should be the exception that a variance is granted. So you should come into these things saying the code is the code, and I'm going to honor the code as it's written, unless this owner can persuade me that they've got such an exceptional practical difficulty or such unique circumstances that really it doesn't work any harm to the neighbors if we grant this variance, but it would work harm to the owner if we don't grant the variance. So you should come into it saying, hey, owner, you have to persuade me that you deserve this variance. The expectation is that you're not getting this variance. So that's kind of the way the waiver thing is supposed to work in the new code. Hopefully, you know, as you start to get these, we'll work through them with Alex's help. And but this is a new concept in this code. And I don't know, have you seen it in other tree codes, or is this something kind of unique to our code?
No, I think they have waivers because at the end of the day, it's what, a 20-page code. We
Right.
can't cover every single scenario that's going to come up, and there will be times when the city arborist's hands are tied, that it doesn't make sense, that I don't necessarily agree with how my interpretation of the code affects this person, this property. But that doesn't mean I can just say, I'll say, I'm sorry, but I can't do X, Y, Z because the code says blank. However, you have the ability to request a waiver, right? And then you can hear it and say, wow, that is an exceptional difficulty. And I think we'll be much better off if they do X, Y, Z, right?
Right, and this section 2, I think, also provides, as the lawyers, it gives us some comfort in that where the litigation usually happens is where the code just did not anticipate this particular owner's circumstances, and there's no way to deviate from it. And that owner gets very upset and says, again, you can argue whether tree code is property rights or not, but there's been arguments made that it's akin to property rights. Do you have a constitutional right in those property rights. So therefore, that's the kind of litigation that we get concerned about. So here, if you have an opportunity to vary the code when it makes sense to do so, and when you've been persuaded by an owner that you should do so, that allows that sort of an escape hatch for us, saying there's an opportunity to avoid litigation here, and perhaps litigation that we would think we have not the better side of the case, but the worst side of the case. So it's a tool. We'll see how it works out, but I think it's going to be something that hopefully, if it's used right, owners will appreciate it because they'll be able to get variances in appropriate circumstances, and you'll appreciate it because when you get into those difficult situations where I think sometimes you sit up there and go, man, the code doesn't allow for this, but this is one of those circumstances where really this owner is being unfairly kind of burdened by the code. It gives you an opportunity to say, your case doesn't neatly fit the code, but we have a process to handle it in a way that makes sense. Questions on variances?
Glenn, when you say neighboring properties, does that also include like a tree with a large canopy so that we've had letters from neighboring, not necessarily directly neighboring property owners, but nearby property owners saying, oh, please don't let them take this down because it offers such, it's part of the culture of the city. And
Yep. Yeah,
are those reasons that will still work under this waiver system?
Yes, that's right. It does not have to be adjacent, touching property. It can be, when it says neighboring properties, it means those generally in the community. And, we've had testimony before of people who say, I walk my dogs in this area. Sure, I live a half a mile down, but this is a tree that I enjoy every single day on my walks. And so it has some impact on me as a neighbor, even though I'm a half a mile down the street. So I think you can take that all into consideration when you're hearing these.
That has come up in some of our,
Right.
under the previous code anyway, so.
And the one thing I would just emphasize that Glenn said, you can think of this as a safety valve. So it won't be routinely used, but in exceptional circumstances, it might be necessary to deviate from the code. There's some case law saying that properties need to be treated in an individual assessment. There needs to be an individual assessment for property. So this is just if there's an exceptional circumstance, this provision could be used. And you're not the Board of Adjustment. Board of Adjustment gets appealed to Superior Court. The appeal from this body would go to the commissioners, and a variance, appeal of a variance is heard such that the court or the commissioners would look to see if it was free from legal error and supported by substantial evidence. So if the case came straight to the higher body, they wouldn't substitute their own judgment for your judgment. As long as it's supported by substantial evidence, it would be sufficient to hold up. And even the Delaware Supreme Court has said it's a relatively low standard to appeal. So the jurisdiction of this body is not, there are bounds to it, there are limits, but there is deference given to your decision.
And it seems to me that it's going to be more important under this new, like a waiver request, that the actual owner appear to give their side of things. It would seem to me that just their contractor may not be enough.
Right.
If anybody asks me, I always tell them it's better if the property owner shows up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, want to move on to the next, pretty much? Sure. And just so you guys know, you'll still see the same thing from me. So you'll still have the report of the city arborist. It'll still have the facts that should lead to a professional opinion, not a personal opinion, not I think they shouldn't take this tree down because it's my favorite tree species, right? Professional opinion. And the city arborist report may support the variance, like in the scenario I gave you where, wow, this code really doesn't reflect this, but this doesn't seem right, or it may not, okay? But at the end of the day, it's gonna be this commission's responsibility to approve or deny, not mine, not the lawyers, not the commissioners, right? Not Ann's, but you. So I came up with some ideas of what I think you guys have heard. I think these are all things that we've kind of heard. I've heard, you guys have heard, right? They want to plant something different. They don't want to plant. They say they can't plant trees. Or my favorite one is, I love trees. I realize this doesn't quite meet the code, but blank. And fill in the blank with those 5 things. I I lived in DC through derecho. I lived in New York through Sandy, and I saw a tree come down on my neighbor's house and it landed in the child's bedroom. These are things I've heard. These are things you will probably eventually hear. So those will run the gamut, certainly. We're kind of lucky, though, in the code because it does really talk about what the intent and purpose of the chapter is. And talking about hardships and exceptional practical difficulty, right? So there are some things that maybe, and I thought of this one myself. So you're technically not supposed to be self-created, and Glenn and Alex can interrupt me if that's wrong, but you can't buy a wooded lot and put a pool right in the middle of the woods and then come to this commission and request a variance because there's too many leaves, right? That should have been a known thing in advance. It can't be an inconvenience. So I can think of a case years ago we had where somebody liked to not have a top on their Jeep or liked to leave the windows down, and needles fell in the car. And they wanted to be able to remove the tree because of that. So inconvenience. That's going to happen no matter what tree you have there. It's not specific. Somebody who just doesn't like the rules, right? Just doesn't think they should apply to them. Specific to the property. So just saying that I have a small lot, really, they're all 5,000. Now, if this person happens to have a 2,500 square foot lot, or we have some that are strangely shaped, like a little wedge, that might make it impossible to get a front yard tree in there if the front yard is
the narrow.
Yeah, if the front yard is 3 by 5 feet, that may not make, and then there's utility lines and a fire hydrant, right? So the code can't really account for a driveway and the fire hydrant and utility lines and then a big utility box and a wedge-shaped property. We'd be 150 pages, right? So those are things you might see. But like Glenn said, everything is case by case. So when you hear these, it's what makes it unique, special, different than everybody else out there. And so in the code, like I said, you guys are lucky that it tells you the intent and purpose. You know, it's up for interpretation, of course, but it spells it out, right? Preserve, protect, conserve trees. Protect, manage trees to enhance the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens, right? And then the purpose, we want to have permits, we want to promote education, we want to regulate the protection, planting, and removal so that we can preserve, protect, and conserve. And those didn't really change from the previous code to now. So those all pretty much stayed exactly the same. So I created a little worksheet just because I feel like when we do these cases that the learning happens right in front of the applicant. And it would be nice if we could just run through a couple of scenarios and how we would all address it without necessarily worrying about it getting appealed to the commissioners or whatever. So just as a training exercise. So I'm going to hand these out, and I can get you guys pens if you didn't bring any. I forgot to.
Thank you.
Left my pen in the car. Yeah, please.
Just one? You want one, Ann?
Does anybody need a pen? Because I have more. Do you need a pen? I have.
Extra? I do. And I didn't want you guys to have too much time to think of this scenario, to tell you the truth. So basically, we have somebody coming to us, hypothetically, and saying they want a waiver. They got denied their permit application. And they said, well, I love trees. I know it doesn't quite meet the code, but I really need more space in my lawn. And initially, you might think, well, I don't know about that. So what happens is they want to remove 4 trees. 2 oaks and 2 pines. They're in that kind of medium size, right? 8 to 19, so not one of the trees that requires a little bit extra protection. They have other trees in the property, so if they get removed, they won't have to replant them. And then we'll say the trees, if you can imagine, they're just kind of sitting in the center of the backyard, And the reason they want the lawn space is because the applicants have young children and they love to play sports and throw the baseball around and kick the soccer ball, throw the lacrosse ball around, set up their nets. And the trees are just bang smack right in the middle and they can't do it, okay? So their one complaint is their yard is just so small, there's no space to do any of those activities that their family enjoys without removing the trees. So if you guys can just take a minute, and I'll flip back through the couple of slides we have and fill out at least the top, like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I put a couple of alternative scenarios at the bottom so we can kind of, you can write your thoughts down on that, but I don't want to, you know,
Are
spend
we,
a ton
are we
of time.
able to ask questions? Like, for example, why aren't they required to replant? I assume
No,
it's
just
because
to
they
take
have-
it-
They
just-
have 90 inches
Yeah, just take it
remaining.
as fact.
Okay.
All right, so here's the first one, an unnecessary hardship or exceptional practical difficulty. I'd say fill it out and we can talk about it after. Just write your thoughts down for when we discuss. I'm not going to collect and grade them. But I'll try to flip through the slides that relate. So if they have an exceptional practical difficulty, okay, I'm going to flip to the purpose intent of the code, if anybody wants to look at that again.
And Liz, just to clarify, this is embedded in the agenda. You might have already mentioned that, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that it's embedded in the agenda.
Yep, and got it all.
And you're saying that they're not required to replant?
Yeah, just say they have enough trees in the front yard and the perimeter of the back that they don't have to replant anything. Because these are really just the trees that are in the center of the backyard that are right in the way. And to be honest, this is not far off from a couple of things requests I can think that I've gotten. And these didn't come out of thin air. I'm really interested in hearing the lawyers' takes on this. Are you guys close to wrapping up? Yeah? Okay. All right. Another 30 seconds and we can be done. I know everybody watching is probably super bored with our legions of watchers. All right. So here's our example. We want more lawn space, and we have the details why. So, do they have an unnecessary hardship or difficulty? Anybody?
No,
No?
I don't think so.
I think they think they have a
A
hardship.
perceived hardship.
Yeah, but I don't think that under what we're considering, in my opinion, that is not what the word hardship is intended to be. They have a difficulty, but
Yeah, they have a difficulty, but
it's certainly not exceptional.
So to me, this is an example where they need to provide testimony as to why it's presenting a difficulty to them, because a 5,000 square foot lot is by definition small.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
and 4 trees in the backyard is a lot of trees. I don't know how they got that many trees there in the first place.
just clustered in there. You just got to work with the facts you're given. But yeah. So, is it really, it's not super specific to the lot, but maybe it is. Like you said, it's everybody has a 5,000 square foot lot, everybody has trees, but 4 trees clustered right in the center, maybe that is kind of specific. It is a little strange, right?
I think maybe if they said that they have a child with disabilities that cannot get around with all those tree roots and everything, I might
That's where I think we need
I
testimony.
might
I
expand
wouldn't.
my opinion just a little bit, but in general, I don't think this
Yeah.
meets the definition of a hardship.
The facts given, yes. So,
Well, the bottom line is they did buy the house and the lot.
well, that's the
what
the
I
thing. I
said,
mean, they
too.
saw the house with the trees.
The trees were there when they bought the property.
or maybe it wasn't. Maybe they inherited it, right?
Well,
don't know.
This is true.
There's a
but
million
then-
different, that's why we say everything is unique, everything is case by case, right? So it doesn't seem to be really specific to their lot. It is, in a way, maybe self-created, because like you said, they purchased the house or built the house on that lot. These were known things. What about the intent and purpose of the code? So do we think it's in line with the code? Is it against the code?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by, is it in line with the code or against the code? I mean, it seems to me like it's not part of the code. It's just they don't like what they have to do.
Right.
Well, so I have a question. The 8 to 19 inches, is that per tree or total?
Individual.
Individual? So they're larger than the 8 inches they're allowed to remove.
I made 'em that size.
without-
Yeah.
Yes, that's the key. If they were all 7-inch trees, they could remove them. They would have
replace
to
them.
replant them.
Yeah. So the intent and the purpose of the code, right? Preservation, conservation, maintenance, management, but we're also protecting them for the health and welfare and well-being of the citizens of Rehoboth.
It's contrary.
I think you could argue both, right? So it's not really preserving or protecting trees, but they're saying we want to do family activities and play and move around in our backyard. health and wellness. And so I think you could argue, in my mind, I was like, no, of course it's against the code. But then when you start breaking it down, there are certain scenarios that you can see it lining up, right? It's not as cut and dry as it may seem at first, in my opinion. Okay. So
If the intent of the code is to preserve the canopy and preserve and maintain the trees, how would cutting them down be in line with the code? I don't.
it's not in line with that part of the code, right? Preserve, protect, conserve. No. Protect and manage trees as valuable assets to protect and enhance the safety, health, and welfare. I think you could argue that portion. Maybe unsuccessfully against the commission. Maybe that wouldn't be enough to prove to you that they should be granted.
Yeah, I mean, I think if their specific reasons would have to come out. You know, for example, are all of their children special needs that they can't, because as I was reading, I'm thinking, well, there are parks in town that they can go and kick a soccer ball around. But if they're special needs
sound like
children,
my
they may
parents
not be
now.
able to send them there
Yeah,
on their own.
Yep.
You know, that kind of thing. So you have to hear their specific reasons in my mind.
Right. So on the outset, seems like this should be a no, but perhaps special circumstances could lead you into, okay, maybe it is
Unique
an
to them.
exceptional
Yeah.
difficulty. Maybe it is unique.
Right.
Even
Right.
at the outset, the facts don't seem that way.
Right.
So then the couple of bonus scenarios, right? Because my initial thought when I was reading this scenario was it should be a no. Okay. Now remember, it's your guys' decision, but that's where my thoughts, I could see how you could potentially persuade somebody, but at the end of the day, it didn't really meet them enough in my mind to give the variance or waiver. But if they only wanted to remove 2 smaller trees and they offered to volunteered to plant 3 new trees instead of just the 2 small ones they were removing, and just plant them in a different spot of the yard so they get a clear center space, do we think that really changes the intent and purpose or the hardship and difficulty?
I do.
Right?
Right. Yeah, I would be okay with that.
There we go, right?
Yep.
So the intent and purpose, now we're actually arguably doing something better, right? We're going to take out 2 smaller ones and replant 3 nice ones, so kind of
And the property owner is not
Posh,
outraged, and they get to use their property in the way they wish, which is their right as the property owner.
and
They get to use it better.
yeah, and everybody, one of those
benefits.
everybody Bennett, it shouldn't really harm anyone. It's trees in the center of the backyard. They're planting new trees. The canopy is maintained, potentially even increased, right? Because now they have 3 trees that they actually wanted to have, not 2 trees they didn't want and probably wouldn't take great care of, right? So it's just that small little detail changed it. Next one. So now instead of removing natives, we're removing Japanese maples. No replanting, same scenario. Did your guys' opinion change?
Definitely. I don't think it needs any explanation.
Well, these are the things so the Japanese maples aren't on that excluded list where you're
They're
automatically,
not invasives.
they're not on
in
that list.
They're not in that list.
Yes. They're not in that list. A lot of people love Japanese maples. You'll ask people, they'll be their favorite tree they've ever seen. People pay thousands of dollars for Japanese maples.
Pretty.
Well, I love Japanese maples. I have one in my yard that I planted, but I still think that in terms of the parameters of this case, it changes it completely.
Yep, because we're no longer talking about canopy trees, native trees. We're just talking about 2 ornamental species that removing them won't harm anybody, right? Just like Glenn said, it's not really going to harm the neighbors to remove these trees, but it is harming the applicant. So just
Other factors you could consider, maybe not in this exact scenario, but say if the trees were line trees on the property line, how that would affect the neighboring property. And thinking about the neighborhood, is it a residential community? And does this affect the character?
I guess I have a question, though. With a lime tree, I know it counts under the new code, but you would still have to get permission from your neighbor to remove a lime tree, correct?
Both have to turn in a permit now.
Yes, yes.
And you'd be responsible for any applicable replanting on
Yes,
both,
on
the
both
properties.
properties. So I don't know how often we're going to hear things related to lime trees.
Right,
I hope for your own sake, not often,
I know.
because it's convoluted.
Yeah.
In my mind. Listen, I did a webinar the other day and it was part 1 about boundary trees. And it's just courts all over the US, depending on where you are, there's different ways to interpret it. And the person giving the webinar gave the different ways this court interpreted in an absolute portion. Like if one fraction of one piece of this tree is on another person's property, then it's equally owned. Other courts have interpreted the majority tree owner is the owner. Others have said that regardless of where you planted the tree, if it's on both own. Whereas another court has said whoever planted the tree owns the tree. So it's never that simple if even the courts aren't conclusive on it throughout the US. Anything that has to have multiple webinars on it is difficult. But I think the point being made that you guys will face a lot of different questions on the waivers, and it has to be something special on a case-by-case basis. They really do have to prove that it's not going to harm, go against the code, harm their neighbors, and it's going to really benefit them without going against the code, right? And maybe even, like in the case of replanting 3 trees, line up with the code. Right? Or maybe it's a species that's not on that exempt list, but maybe is still somewhat of a nuisance. Maybe we just missed it, or maybe it's a new tree and, you guys don't feel like it's that big a deal to remove it.
What about the scenario of planting something that's not on the list? Like, say,
Yeah,
because I know, like Halesia is a beautiful native.
I'm not sure if that gets quite, but let's, for argument's sake, say it's tall enough to be considered a tree. But yeah, so
They'll get to 40 to 60 feet.
yeah, so really they get that tall? But okay. Yeah, so say something is not on the approved, like Japanese maple, they can get 25 feet tall. They're not on the approved list. Crepe myrtles, not on the approved list. I have a crepe myrtle that's 30 feet tall and is bigger than some actual trees. Those will be essentially waiver requests to you guys. So they'll request to plant a different tree species than what is on that list. And you'll have to go through this same thing, right? So if it's against the intent and purpose of the code, which as long as it's not an invasive species, maybe a crepe myrtle has less benefits because it's not native, it doesn't support the wildlife, but it still has some benefits of a tree, right? I mean, at the end of the day, for people that want to, I've always found that people that want to have a tree, so say they really want to plant a specific type of tree or in a specific location, will take better care of it than people that don't want it or don't care. Like, we had a bunch of clients in DC and they would have one tree because it's DC and they had no room. They would spend thousands of dollars a year with us taking care of their one tree. And then I had clients who had wooded backyards and I'd be like, oh, you want us to take down that dead tree back there? And they're like, no, it'll fall over. It's not near the house. So everybody's priority, they didn't really care. They had 100 of them. They didn't really care about the trees. So I think that, and I hope that the new code too, it gives that flexibility. We doubled the number of species that you can plant, that you're more likely to find something that you want to plant and you'll hopefully want to take better care of it and not feel like you can't plant a tree because then you're locked into it. Like say you just are a regular homeowner and you have no trees on your lot. And there are houses like that, okay? Never been a tree there. House is from 1950. Just is what it is, okay? You don't want them to feel that they can't plant a tree because they'd be shooting themselves in the foot. So the new code did try to address that, basically, that you won't be penalized for doing something good and planting a tree, and now all of a sudden the tree is 3 inches and you can't get a permit to remove it because it's healthy and you just don't like it. Now you will have to plant multiple in that scenario, right?
Right.
But you still are allowed to remove it. So there is some flexibility in there, and anybody who's ever worked with codes, to put flexibility in a code is such a difficult thing. And I think we did manage it with a few chosen key things, like those 2 extra reasons, increasing the species list and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's still a code. So we still can't cover every single scenario that you guys are going to come across. And somebody will always have something unique or specific, or some, whoever said it, perceived hardship. And you'll have to balance that out. Just like Glenn said, how is it going to harm is it going to harm everybody else more than it's harming this person? And it's not an enviable job, for sure.
So will we see, we won't see street tree cases anymore, will we? Or could we, if you say no and they really want one to come down, can they come here?
No,
Okay,
it goes to my boss, technically. It can't be
Okay.
appealed.
okay.
What
Wow.
what was your question?
It cannot be
Street
appealed.
trees will not come to us anymore.
Okay.
No, you won't see them. Nope. Because, I mean, you guys don't have, you don't know the pruning rotations. You don't know the internal goals in terms of, what percentages we want of different species mix, stuff like that can't really expect a
Right.
commission to have memorized. And whether, because a lot of those decisions come on to whether it's a valuable part of our inventory. That's how I think of, on a case-by-case basis, is this tree a good part of our tree inventory? Do we want this 20-inch pear?
Right. No.
Usually no. However, for example, in Country Club Estates,
Yeah, it's the only thing, yeah.
they are the only canopy. So even though they're invasive and we don't like them, they have inherent value. And we've had times where we removed some for road projects and got tons of complaints. So, and we can defend why we removed them, right? It's a pear tree, it's falling apart, it's half dead.
Right.
But, just because, so that all wraps into that. And I don't think that's a bad way for you guys to look at those waivers either. So the Japanese maples, do we really need that in our total urban forest inventory? What difference do 2 Japanese maples really make, right? Not much. Some pretty leaves, that's about it, and a nest for a red-winged blackbird that will live anywhere, so. You guys have any other questions?
Well, so what happens under the new code if people, they remove a tree without a permit, or they essentially do something to kill their tree?
So there are penalties and violations in the new code, relatively similar to the previous one, that include fines, removal of licenses, including business license, so like your contractor, replanting, and stop work, say if it's construction, and revoking of residential rental licenses as well. So I had a couple of new tools to that, but it was about the same. We were limited by the charter that
Oh, yeah.
capped it $500. So
And what was your question?
penalties.
Penalties, if somebody essentially kills their tree.
It's always
There's one that Katie and I know the tree we're referring to that.
is a pole.
No,
it's now gone.
Topped
gone.
one. Yeah.
Katie Street, if you know what
Well,
I'm
that's
talking
different.
about.
That's people topping a tree
They
is
butchered it.
always against the code. But here's what it is when you, in the previous code, and I'm not sure how this works in the new one, because I was thinking of a different tree where similar happened,
Well, yes, there is that one.
which is still doing all right, surprisingly.
I know.
kind of did what I thought it would do, but puffed
Little
back out.
odd, but it is still.
Dr. Seuss tree. So in those scenarios, the only option was to fine them by determining that the work they did essentially constituted tree removal, because the work that they did would ultimately lead to the death of the tree, right? So it could be defined as tree removal under the code. However, if we wrote them up from that, then we'd have no recourse to prevent them from actually removing the tree. Because if we already said you removed a tree without a permit, well, they could go back in and actually remove it, and think about the one that puffed back out. It's still serving a purpose. It still has function. It still has that huge trunk. It's still soaking up stormwater. It still has animals that utilize it. Maybe one day it'll have shade again, right? Katie's laughing. But it still has more value than no tree, right? We had both sides of the coin on that one. I had people arguing with me for each way. And I kind of felt like it was a lose-lose, that no matter what we did, like, it didn't really make anything better.
Wait, are you discussing whether or not to fine the people for what they did?
Yeah, because if you fine them, it would have to be tree removal without a permit.
And then they could go ahead and remove the tree without a permit.
Yes. And then on top of that, you probably made them angry, so then they might end up doing other things. Like,
Right,
hey, if
right,
that's the only,
right.
I just found the loophole.
Yeah, but that was the problem also under the old ordinance, is that the penalties were not so great as to actually deter the removal of sometimes significant trees. But I can understand that you're limited by the charter, so there's only so much you can do. And what you said in addition is, it's a tree, so if nobody takes care of it and doesn't,
Yeah.
it's not going to benefit anything to try to enforce it. So
Yeah, and we did add a couple of new, like I said, a couple of new tools in there that we hopefully won't have to utilize, but we can utilize if, the situation warrants it. I mean, it's kind of relative, right? So if somebody cuts and removes a 40-inch tree that they know they needed a permit for, it's a lot different than somebody cut down a 10-inch Japanese maple,
Well, yeah.
right?
Like if it's a 40-inch oak.
Yeah, and they're bringing in a crane on a Sunday. I think 40 might have been smaller. But at the end of the day,
Like 50-inch oak.
at the end of the day, do you really think they knew what they were doing to that tree? The owners?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know a lot of
I
people.
know they knew what they were doing.
A lot of people don't, though.
The contractor probably knew what they were doing.
Oh, the contractor would. That's your number. But I got people in my last job asking me all the time to top trees. All the time.
Well, the homeowners actually specifically said they didn't like the leaves that the one that Carolyn and I.
I mean, listen, there's a lot better ways to kill a tree than topping it. A lot cheaper ways.
Yeah.
I can think of a
Yeah.
few in my
Yeah.
tool belt.
That part out, Ann.
But point being, the penalties and violations they changed a little bit, but not dramatically so, because our hands are relatively tied. Like, we can do the business license, we can do the rental license. I hope we don't have to. I have fined quite a few people. It's usually the replanting requirements that cost so much. So that's kind of where they get hit in the wallet a little bit.
Right, 'cause it can get into the per day if you go back and find they haven't done it and then they don't comply.
That's, gosh, the payment of the fine, that's only happened like once where they didn't pay within the week. They're usually, most of the tree removal without a permit is, I'll say, semi-accidental during construction. Like, they dig the hole and the tree falls in.
Or somebody backs over a tree or,
Yeah, but
Subcontractor comes in
to deliver something or.
and just
Yeah.
cuts it out because it's in their way. Yeah, that type of stuff.
Realize it, yeah.
It's, yeah. I think we're
How many
lucky.
contractors really don't realize it? At this point in time, people realize it.
It's
It's
not-
Rehoboth. We're not talking about somewhere out in the county. We're talking about Rehoboth, and people know that they're supposed to preserve trees, especially if they have an orange thing around them.
Yeah.
I don't think there's too many questions there.
Yeah, the one instance I can think of, it was actually everything had been closed out except for they had to move like a propane tank, like it was too close to the house. And so the house was sodded, done, and the propane company comes in, no tree protection, right? Because everything's done. And there's a small tree in the way, and they're just like, choop, to get their equipment in to move the propane tank. So those scenarios, unfortunately, we can try to avoid them. We have the arborist reports for construction, so hopefully that will afford a little extra acknowledgement and awareness to those trees, and just stay on top of them so that people know that you really can't get away with it. If people think that you can get away with things, it'll keep happening. Thankfully, I don't think it's too bad overall compared to other places I've witnessed.
Is there going to be training offered to the contractors, or at least a copy of the new code sent out to the contractors, say be aware? Or is it just up to them to stay up to date on what the rules are?
So we've informed the contractors multiple times
Okay.
along the way, including after it
Right,
passed. And
right.
I think I had about 60 to 70 contacts that I reached out to, and I think I only heard back from 3 or 4. And I specifically asked if anybody thought it would be helpful to have training, and nobody really wanted it.
Okay, all right.
So I would just assume that if they have questions, they will call me.
So I know the new code is out there if you go under trees, but if you actually go to the code itself to search, the new one isn't there yet.
Yes,
How
it's
long does that-
under.
It's under new laws.
Well, if you go to chapter 253 and pull it up, I think it's the old one that still comes
Correct.
up.
Yeah, you have to
Yeah.
go on the left-hand side. You have to click
Yeah.
on new.
But I'm assuming eventually, when you click on chapter 253, the new one will appear.
It will. And how long does it usually take them from, I mean, this is a lengthy one. The short ones, they get up pretty quickly, but how long will it take, do you think, for the code publisher to get the online version in chapter 253?
But actually, whenever I send it over and it's already there, you can look at the new legislation and it's already in there.
Yeah, so it's there under new legislation, but it's not, it hasn't,
It's dependent on the editor, how long it takes for them to.
Well, the last time, I'm trying to think, when we added the new Parks and Recreation Code, it was at least 2 months. And I mean, it's a different scenario, but it was 2
Right.
months from the time in
Okay.
which it was passed and Ann sent it to them, to which they actually got the work done. So
Right. Okay,
fingers crossed another month, but I think we're at their mercy with that one.
yeah.
All
Okay.
right, anybody have any other questions? Park and Shade, new tree code, anything we need more information about in future sessions? Because we can tack on to the end of other meetings if there's things we need to go over in more detail.
I think time will tell.
Yeah.
Well, that's very true. Like I said, we'll need to step back. We'll need to step back at the end of a year probably and evaluate if it accomplished the goals and how we thought certain changes would work. Are they working?
Wait, will we start using this code, the new code, at the next meeting?
So I've already reviewed and issued some permits under the new code, the current code. The issue being that prior to it being adopted, there were people sitting pending, like I needed a tree planting plan or something like that I was waiting on. So there is a potential for a couple of them to come back around. So it is possible you would still hear appeals under the
But
old
in
code.
general, we'll start with the August meeting under the new plan, unless they were all started under the old plan. Do we have
Yeah.
anything for August?
Correct me if I'm right, your report will tell us which, at least for a while, will tell us which
Yes.
code it's falling under,
I'll
correct?
try to, just like I did in this
that.
one, it falls under this code adopted in 88 and 2006. So that should be when you see
Right.
stuff from 20 and 40 years ago, that'll be a trigger, old code essentially. But yeah, I recognize it'll be hard to kind of, hopefully we won't have to jump back and forth too much because I think that'll be complicated. But at the end of the day, the appeals and stuff for you guys, it shouldn't be that much different. The ability to do a waiver is new, but how you would have done it under the old code versus the current one shouldn't be that dramatically different if you had had that ability, right? And appeals, it should all, you might have more information or different information, but it shouldn't really change your guys' process too much.
To be specific, we couldn't really give a waiver under the old code because it had to meet one of those 7 reasons why you denied it in the first place. But now we have that extra step that even if it doesn't meet those specific 7 things, we can give consideration to waiving the rules. That's basically the difference, I think.
Yeah, I anticipate or hope that you guys will have a lot less cases. Just by virtue, I think most of the ones you heard were fee and lieu and street trees. I just can't fathom to guess how many waiver requests you'll hear. I hope not many, but I honestly have no clue. But if that was all considered equal, your actual caseload will be reduced and you'll just have more difficult ones in my mind. less, hey, this is a city tree and it has a big mushroom growing at the base and looks like it might fall over. And more like, well, this is a special circumstance because kind of like the waiver scenario we just went through.
So what are you doing? You're passing off the hard
Yes,
stuff to us?
exactly.
Liz.
Exactly.
So
Caught me.
I do have one other question. So in the new code, it has that report that you have to provide in October. It gives a specific time frame in October.
We don't have an urban forestry management plan, so
Right, but
there's
I mean
nothing
that
to provide.
The data where they talk about the total number of permits issued and denied, total number of trees removed and replanted.
yeah, I can do
you'll
that.
present something to us.
Yes, I can do
Okay.
that. Yeah, the
Yeah.
total permits issued, approved, denied. Mhm.
Right, okay.
Yep, that's just a report to run. That's easy.
Liz,
Okay.
I have a personal question. With the amount of construction going on, would you say the canopy is being significantly reduced, somewhat reduced, or managing to maintain itself?
I think we've done a good job of maintaining. If you look at the state comes out with this data, LIDAR, like overhead data of the tree canopy, and they do it whenever they have time, is what I've been told. And even the foresters for the state and the urban foresters don't know when that is. And they wish it was every other year. But from when the previous 2 times they've done it in the last 10 years, from like 10 years ago to 4 years ago, our canopy showed a dramatic increase. But then when you delve into the details, it's because technology changed so dramatically that they said you're probably at a break even, which I think is good.
Yeah, I think a break even is excellent.
Most places across the U.S. are losing canopy, and I think we started out pretty treed overall. We have a pretty high percentage of urban forestry canopy. So I think if we maintain that, that's a laudable goal and accomplishment unto itself, rather than just saying we need to increase canopy for the sake of increasing it. But you can look that stuff up online. Delaware Urban Forestry has the information, but it's old.
Yeah, it's just the building has increased so much in the last 5 years.
Yeah,
I feel like, but I think it's a win if we've managed to maintain, because there were a lot of lots that had trees on them that, the new bigger houses those trees disappeared. But if we can maintain, I think that we're doing.
And you think we're building 20, 30 new houses a year? I mean, we definitely have demos where there were no trees on the lot before, too. And then every year, the bigger trees get bigger. The smaller trees get bigger. Some trees die. Some trees get replaced. Some people plant trees of their own volition, not because we tell them to, right? So you can't account, like when I give you numbers of trees removed, trees planted, it's not taking into account growth of existing trees and people planting trees just because they like planting trees in their yards. So it's only a snapshot in time, so to speak.
Okay. Is there any further questions for Liz?
Nope. All right now.
Good.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have a lot of questions as this goes on, but but we always have questions.
I mean, we haven't had any cases, so
Unfortunately, I feel like there's still going to be a huge learning curve in front
Yeah.
of people, which is really kind of embarrassing. But
Yeah.
but it is what it is.
It's got to learn together because I'm in the same boat. Like I used to be able to issue a permit. Like if I sat down at my desk, did the site assessment visit, I could issue it in 5 minutes. And now it's like 20 to 30 because I have to reread the whole entire new code again because I don't have it memorized. Whereas the previous 30-page code after 7 years was, I see it when I close my eyes. So
Do the homeowners know now that they can potentially come in for a variance, such as I have a pool in my wooded yard and I don't like any of the trees? I don't like the leaves that fall. You know,
It's not, it probably hasn't been advertised, but if they read, they may find that they can request a waiver.
yeah, and their contractor
Right.
may see
Okay.
that. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's my responsibility too to inform them of any options they may have under the code. So if I deny people, I have to say you can appeal under, here you go, 30 days, here's the section of the code, so they can read it and say, oh, waiver, perfect, that's just what would work for me, right?
right.
But yeah, it's not like every homeowner out there knows that this is, a new thing. We advertise as much as we could online, the city's website, socials, press releases about the code. But yeah, you would have to take the step to
Yeah, newspaper articles were done.
You would have to take the
it was
step-
on the news.
to dig in and at least look at that comparison chart because it mentions the waiver in there, right? So you would have to take a little initiative.
Okay.
But it is out there at least. So, like I said, only a few permits so far, so we'll see where we end up with this.
All right. Thank you.
Well, wait, so has anybody, has anybody asked for a variance so far?
No.
So we should have less business coming up.
I don't have anything, I mean, Ann might be able to speak to it. I don't have anything for next month yet. And I think we're done. So it would have already had to been in. But I mean, like I said, I don't want to guess how many waiver requests you'll get. But I
No,
think overall you don't have the fee in lieu and you don't have the street trees. So if you really think of true appeals of the city arborist decision, there's not that many. 10 a year max. So just depending on the waiver.
Liz, you'll probably exercise some discretion, and if a case looks like maybe it's a good candidate for a variance, you'll let an applicant know that's a possibility, whereas cases that are probably not good candidates for variances, you won't be so forthcoming. I would think. But do as you will.
I kind of have a form I send to them with a link, so.
I would like to say that it does make sense that we have the hardest cases because there's 5 of us, and so when 5 people have to come to an agreement, it takes a lot more than for one person just, out on their own. So I think that that's appropriate, that, if somebody really disagrees with something and then they want to
Yeah.
come and,
Well-
then they have to convince a majority of this board, not just one person.
Right. You're supposed to be representing the community at large. I'm reading, interpreting, enforcing, applying the code, right? So,
But that, it makes it important that everybody on the committee really express their view, because part of the importance of this commission is that there are 5 of us. So if nobody speaks up and gives their opinion, it might as well just be one person.
all representing different population segments, areas of the city, backgrounds, stuff like that. So yeah, the more of a variety of opinions you have, the better. It's just
Yes.
like information, right?
Yes. Okay, with that concluded, did you have something?
I was just going to thank Liz for doing a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
and the
Liz.
chair.
So I move that we adjourn.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned.